Reinhard Heydrich was known by many names. Adolf Hitler called him the man with the iron heart. The French called him the blonde beast. But in the cobblestone streets of Prague, he was simply known as the Butcher. By 1942, Heydrich had reached the absolute peak of his terrifying power. He was the chief of the Reich Security Main Office, the head of the Gestapo, and the mastermind behind the darkest conspiracy in human history. Yet his ultimate assignment was to crush the spirit of Czechoslovakia. He arrived in Prague not just to govern, but to eliminate any shadow of resistance. He ruled through absolute terror, signing execution orders over breakfast and paralyzing the entire nation with fear. He was so confident in his absolute control, so certain that no one would dare to touch him, that he drove through the streets of Prague in an open-top green Mercedes, completely without armor and without a single bodyguard. This arrogance would become his fatal mistake. Deep in the shadows of occupied Europe, a deadly counterstroke was already in motion. London was preparing a response, a mission so dangerous, so calculated, that its success would change the entire course of the Second World War. The code name was Operation Anthropoid. Two men were chosen for this impossible task: Josef Gabčík, a fierce Slovak, and Jan Kubis, a quiet but deadly Czech. They were not elite soldiers when the war began, but ordinary men pushed to the edge by the destruction of their homeland. Trained in the brutal, unforgiving camps of the British Special Operations Executive, they learned the art of silent killing, explosives, and urban warfare. They knew from the very first day that this was a one-way ticket. The chances of surviving an assassination attempt on the most protected man in the Nazi apparatus were practically zero. On a freezing night in December 1941, the roaring engines of a British Halifax bomber broke the silence over the skies of Czechoslovakia. Gabčík and Kubis jumped into the pitch-black void, falling through the freezing air, landing heavily in the snow-covered forests near Prague. They were completely alone in enemy territory, surrounded by thousands of Gestapo agents. For months, they lived like ghosts, moving from safe house to safe house, relying on a fragile network of local resistance fighters who risked everything, including the lives of their families, just to give them a piece of bread or a place to hide. The tension was suffocating. Every knock on the door could mean the concentration camp. Every stranger on the street could be a traitor. But as the spring of 1942 arrived, the target finally moved into their sights. May 27th, 1942. The morning sun was rising over the city, but the air felt freezing. Josef Gabčík and Jan Kubis took their positions at a sharp hairpin turn in the suburb of Liben. This was the perfect spot. To navigate the tight corner, Heydrich's green Mercedes would have to slow down to a crawl. Gabčík hid a British Sten submachine gun under a thick trench coat. Kubis waited a few meters away, carrying a modified, highly volatile anti-tank grenade in his briefcase. Minutes turned into agonizing hours. The tension was driving them insane. Every second felt like eternity. Suddenly, a signal came from their lookout. The green Mercedes was approaching, alone, unarmored, right on schedule. As the car slowed down to turn the corner, Gabčík stepped directly into the middle of the road. He threw off his coat, raised the Sten gun, looked straight into the eyes of the Butcher of Prague, and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The gun was jammed. A single piece of grass or a manufacturing defect had ruined months of planning in a fraction of a second. Heydrich, instead of ordering his driver to accelerate and escape, stood up in the car, drew his pistol, and prepared to fight. He believed he was invincible. But he forgot about the second man. Seeing the disaster, Jan Kubis reacted instantly. He grabbed the heavy grenade from his briefcase and hurled it at the slowing car. The grenade did not land inside the vehicle. It struck the rear tire and exploded with shattering force. The blast ripped through the car, shattering the windows and sending metal fragments tearing through the air. Thick black smoke covered the street. Kubis, wounded in the face by his own bomb, jumped on his bicycle and fled. Gabčík disappeared into the chaos of the city. Heydrich crawled out of the burning wreckage, bleeding heavily from his side, where shrapnel and seat fibers had pierced his lungs. He collapsed on the cobblestones. The invincible butcher was broken. He was rushed to a nearby hospital under heavy guard, but the invisible enemy had already done its work. Inside his wounds, a deadly infection was spreading. A few days later, on June 4th, the man with the iron heart died in agony. The wrath of Adolf Hitler was catastrophic. He demanded the immediate destruction of Czechoslovakia. The Gestapo launched the most brutal manhunt in history, terrorizing the population, executing thousands of innocent citizens, and completely wiping the village of Lidice off the map. Yet, the two paratroopers remained invisible. They were hiding in the darkest, coldest place in Prague, the underground crypt of the Saints Cyril and Methodius Church. Along with 5 other resistance fighters, they lived in the damp shadows, surrounded by stone and dust, waiting for an escape plan. But safety was an illusion. A fellow paratrooper, broken by fear and greed, betrayed them to the Gestapo for a massive reward. On the morning of June 18, 1942, over 700 elite Waffen-SS soldiers surrounded the church. The orders were clear: take them alive. The battle that followed was a modern epic of courage against impossible odds. For hours, 3 paratroopers held the choir loft of the church, fighting like lions with simple pistols against machine guns and grenades. When their ammunition ran dry, the battle moved to the dark underground crypt where Gabčík and Kubis were hidden. The SS cut a hole in the street, sticking fire hoses inside to drown the men out like rats. They tossed tear gas into the darkness. But every time a German soldier tried to crawl through the small entrance, he was met with furious gunfire. The underground crypt became a fortress of defiance. For 7 hours, 7 ordinary men fought off an entire army. But heroes run out of bullets, too. As the water reached their waists and the final magazines were spent, the SS heard 4 echoing shots from the darkness. Gabčík, Kubis, and their brothers saved the very last bullets for themselves. They chose death over surrender. They died as ghosts, but they proved to the world that even the most terrifying monsters of the Reich could be bled. Watch until the very end, and let us know in the comments. Would you have taken that one-way ticket to Prague? Underground secrets and dark history are waiting for you. Subscribe for more untold historical documentaries.